Jez, the purple engine is a 30 trucks class that lives on the North Western Railway. She pulls evening mail trains along the mainland, picking up and dropping off mail at each station. Sometimes a mailman named Tom Tipper would drive his postman, delivering mail to where Jez couldn't go. She and Tom were good friends. One day, Jez was delivering some passengers to the station when she saw Tom Tipper on the platform, looking quite concerned. "Is something wrong, Tipper?" Jez questioned. "Yes, there is. Did you notice something strange or unusual at the harbor last night?" Tom replied. "No," Jez questioned. "What's the matter?" Tom sighed. "This morning, I got a complaint from a very angry woman. She said that she received a letter from her husband, which should be impossible because he died in the war. She thinks it's a prank, and my chief is blaming me." "Oh dear," Jez frowned. "I'm sure we can do something to solve this mystery. I'll let you know if I see anything strange." Tom smiled. "Thank you, Jez. You are a good friend." And with that, Tom turned and walked back to his van. Jez spent the rest of the day thinking about a solution to Tom's dilemma, but sadly, nothing came to mind. That evening, a thick fog clung to the harbor as Jez backed down on her train. She kept watch for anything suspicious. The fog played with the landscape, shaping the cranes and ships into unrecognizable form. It sent a chill through Jez's boiler. Jez returned her gaze to the platform and jumped. On the platform was a man right beside her. The man was pale and quiet. His clothes were old and his face was tired. "Hello, sir," Jez stammered, building whatever courage she had. The man said nothing. His gaze was fixed on Jez. Jez took a deep breath and spoke. "Are you lost? The last passenger train left hours ago." The man shook his head and held out a letter. "Oh," Jez exclaimed. "A letter? My driver would gladly." The man shook his head once again and thrust the letter out to Jez. Jez chuckled. "I couldn't take it myself, sir. It would fly right off me. If you put it in the van, I will make sure it gets delivered." The man, still looking sad, lowered his arm and walked towards the van. "That was strange," Jez muttered. Soon the guard's whistle blew and Jez set off into the night. Jez woke with a jolt. There were the Fat Controller, Tom Tipper, and two women standing in front of her. The older woman angrily held two letters in her hand. "I'm sorry to wake you, Jez," said the Fat Controller, "but we have an important issue to address. This is Mars Smith," boomed the first woman. "Listen here. How dare you mock my husband? I will not allow him to become a part of a horrid joke." "Calm down, Mum," said the second younger woman. "We don't know it was these two. We don't know they're innocent either. I will get to the bottom of this," commanded Ms. Smith. The Fat Controller quickly recomposed himself. "Now, Jez, if you know anything about this, I suggest you speak up now." Jez thought for a moment. "I do know something about this, sir." Jez recounted the previous night with the strange man. His crew listened with confusion. "Are you sure he went back to the vans?" Jez questioned her driver. "I don't remember seeing a man last night," continued her fireman. Jez felt a cold glare from Ms. Smith. "Hold on," Tom began. "Did you say he wore old-fashioned clothing? His description sounds just like the man I saw." Everyone was silent. "Well," huffed Ms. Smith, "how do we catch this crook?" "We should keep an eye out," suggested Tom. "He'll probably show up again tonight. We could catch him in the act." "I shall be at the harbor tonight to catch this criminal myself. I should not find that either of you are responsible or warned Ms. Smith. Jez and Tom gulped. Ms. Smith turned and walked to her car. "I'm sorry about her," spoke the younger woman quietly. Then she turned and followed her mother. The Fat Controller turned. "Best be on your guard tonight, Jez." He then left to return to his office. That evening, Jez arrived at the harbor and backed down onto her train. Mist smothered the nearby landscape once again. It was cold and eerie. Jez's crew left to ask the workers about the man. Jez remained vigilant, hoping to spot the man. Suddenly, she heard a sound. She looked across the harbor, but it was just Henry and the Flying Kipper. With a sigh, she looked back and jumped. There was the man once again. Jez frowned, plucking up courage. "I suppose you're the one behind those letters." The man nodded, still not saying a word. Jez continued, "I don't know who you think you are, but you should not make a joke out of Ms. Smith." The man pointed to himself. "Yes, you," Jez exclaimed. He pointed at himself again. "Gerald." The man and Jez both looked over to see Ms. Smith and Jane approaching them. Suddenly, Jez realized the man was Ms. Smith. At the sight of his wife and daughter, Ms. Smith smiled wide. "Hi, Dad," Jane said, tears welling in her eyes. Ms. Smith smiled widely as he put his hand over his heart. He then turned to his wife. "It's so nice to see you again," beamed Mus Smith. "I love you, dear." The man blew a kiss to her and turned to face Jez and mouthed the words, "Thank you. You're very welcome, sir." Jez smiled politely, and with that, Mus Smith turned and walked away, fading into the mist. It was silent. Mus Smith turned to Jez. "I'm sorry for my accusations. My husband sent me letters every week to let me know he was ill. When the letters stopped, I knew something was wrong. I suppose he wanted to give me the last letters. I'm sorry for blaming you and Matippa. It seems Joel thought you two were best for the job. I read them both before we left, and they were beautiful." Jay's crew returned. They had seen everything. "Would you like a ride home, ma'am?" asked Jay's fireman. "No, thank you," smiled Mus Smith. "I'd like to stay here a little longer, but thank you ever so much for the offer." The crew smiled and tipped their hats as they climbed aboard Jez. Jez whistled goodbye as she left the platform. Jez smiled as she left the harbor, glad she could help, even if accidentally. She couldn't wait to tell Tom Tipper the news.